Hello, this is Brian Foster, and welcome to our Tuesday night uh, live stream on YouTube. Let me just send this so people on can see what they want when they on the Facebook group. So we are live streaming on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and on my Facebook group, Your Spiritual Journey. So welcome everyone. First, I'd like to say is that the exciting news is I have the Spirits book completely in audio format now. So if you go to my website, nwspiritism.com, you can see it down at the link below. And you can go on the right-hand navigation bar and you will see it says Spirits, all my audiobooks, and you can download the Spirits book. I have it in parts. I have an MP3 format, and I also have an audiobook format. You can download the audiobook format, put it, and you listen to it through iTunes, whatever you want. It's all there. So again, please hit the bell, subscribe to the channel. We are spreading Spiritism. We are spreading the words of Christian Spiritism, of reincarnation, of karma, and what the spirit world is all about. And today we're going to talk about, as we've been talking about several weeks, is the officer. Now, the officer is a person who's very focused, but he was focused in what he wanted. He's very selfish and materialistic, and therefore he went down into a world of his where he belonged, right? He was at the lower zone, which is around the earth, and then he went down to below that, what we call the dark abyss. He calls that hell, but really there is no hell according to Spiritism. It's more of a purgatory where it's not a nice place, but you can get out of there by changing your character and your attitude. So no one is ever banished to anything bad forever. As you raise your honesty, get rid of your primitive emotions. That's after all, that's why we're on Earth. You will be helped by spirit benefactors to help you rise into heaven. So, and this is his story. He's talking to a medium who J.S.M. Ward, and he is telling him that, as he sits, night after night, and telling him his story of how he went all the way down into hell and then came back out again. Now, so last week we ended with the fact that he had actually led an army to take over part of a city, and he won. But of course, it's always, there's rebellions all the time, and you can't die. Nobody can actually die in hell, in what he says, purgatory, we should say. And so and everyone's sarcastic and mean. It's not a nice place to be. And so the emperor that he was running an army for said, you can get yourself into the body of a man if you find someone like a sorcerer on earth. And then you can enjoy, the materialistic pleasures that you've been missing. So he goes, oh, okay. So the emperor did that on purpose to get him, focus off of trying to be a power center against the emperor. And so now we start with this. He says, so then I set myself to find a man who on earth had been a sorcerer. I discovered a good many, more than I expected, but most of them had only played at the game. The reason, of course, was that those who had really obtained any considerable knowledge in the subject had, on death, fallen even lower in hell than we were. I found one man, however, who had been associated with a far abler man who had fallen lower. The man in my dominion told me all that he had learnt from the other, though he had not dared to practice it, and I soon discovered how to get in touch with a magician on earth. This student of the occult was a German and lived in Prague, or rather on the threshold of that city. He knew a lot about magic and had already discovered how to raise and control the spirits of the dead. In plain English, weak-willed spirits of the astral plane. So let's stop there for a second. So, you always read about, the magicians controlling, if they knew the name, they could control the spirit. Well, as even Spiritism tells us that, no, that's not possible unless you have a very low-level spirit who is very weak-willed. And it's just like this officer was able, by his focus of his mind and his energy, and he was able to dominate people in purgatory. Again, even a human could dominate a spirit if that spirit was very weak, just with his personal magnetism. And of course, it happens on the opposite too, where spirits will dominate humans. And in fact, a lot of obsession and um, and other mental illnesses uh, are caused by spirits, you know, interfering with the thought process of a person on Earth. And that's why in Spiritism, there's many ways of trying to help someone who is schizophrenic or whatever is. Of course, always go to your own psychiatrist or psychologist. But what Spiritism tells us is that a lot of times it's spirits who are trying to get revenge on something that person did in a previous life. And in Brazil, there are spiritist hospitals where they will work, have medications and they'll have psychiatrists helping these people. But they'll also try to do is we'll try to communicate with the spirits who could be bothering that person to make them to say, look, forgive that person. They may have done something bad to you in the past, but that's water under the bridge. Can we help this person? So anyway, that kind of gives you a background story of that. So then he said he could also do something with the elementals. He was now working to raise a real devil from hell, and it was I that answered his invocation. I had set the old magician who was in hell to work before me, in spite of his prayers, for he was afraid. As his incantations rose, they came in contact with those from the man on earth. This stream of incantation soon made itself plain to me, and I was thus informed that there was one on earth who wanted such as I. So voluntarily, this is the officer talking, I stepped into the stream of invocation and joined my will to theirs. At once I seemed to be drawn through space and found myself before him. The student of the occult, as he called himself, was standing in the middle of his magic circle, within which were two triangles forming a six-pointed star. All around it were pentagons and a whole host of other mystic signs. A brazier burnt in the room, and from it rose a heavy perfume, which filled the room with smoke. The room itself was perfectly dark and appeared to be a cellar with walls of stone and the floor of the same material. There were some cases of mummies along one side of the wall and a few articles of furniture, but the larger part of the room was completely bare. Now, the officer is saying, now I could see him, he as yet could not see me, and continued his incantations. So all these little symbols and stars and all that mean nothing. This is the officer, who was not a good spirit at this time, went and answered a person who was trying to call him. This is why, again, this is why so many say be careful with mediums meetings when you're trying to communicate with the spirit, because you don't know what level they are on. That's why one should read the medium's book, educate yourself on that, because you can have a bad spirit that calls you and then tries to bother you. And that's why, you have to be careful. Now, I know, a lot of established religions say, no, whatever you talk, you're talking to demons. Well, no, if you read Allan Kardec's The Medium's book, you will see that you can start to decipher the level of spirit you're talking to. And that's why you want to talk to someone that's good, that's going to help you. And of course, this is done a lot in Spiritist medium in meetings. And in fact, I've been in Spiritist medium meetings, and they say a prayer. They have their meeting in a room in their place of worship, and they have it at the same time at the same day of the week, and therefore that whole room is protected by higher spirits, so they only let people in that they want to talk to and who may need help. So there's a lot to know about this. So one has to be careful. So he said, now that though I could see him, as yet he could not see me, and continued his incantations. I began to will that he should see me, and then I perceived lying outside the circle at some little distance from it a woman. She was not dead, but in a trance. And I knew at once why she was there. She was mediumistic, and from her I could build up for the time being a temporary habitation of some sort. I moved towards her and began to draw from her the more etherealized elements, at the same time exerting my powerful will to the intent that he should see me. Soon he did so. I doubt if, as yet, any ordinary mortal would have been able to, but he was possessed of clairvoyance, though not in the highest degree. As I became visible to him, I perceived that I gave out a kind of lurid red light. It was not much like the brilliant red light of the opera when Mephistopheles appeared, but it is evidently from some such phenomena as I was now producing that the tradition had grown up. I'm not quite sure for the reason, whether it was due to the predominance of hatred in my aura or simply because the wizard expected me to come in that form. But at any rate, if he expected horns and a cloven hoof, he did not get them. I could see that he was quaking with fear, but he pulled himself together and cried, "Come hither, slave, I command." And then the officer replied, "Slave be damned. I am no one's slave. If you want my services, you've got to pay for them." And this seemed to disconcert him a little. You see, he did not follow along the traditional lines of evoking evil spirits according to the ancient legends. As a matter of fact, stories of these sorts of things emanate almost slowly from the mouth of the magician and were doubtless colored accordingly. So again, as he was saying, these stories of people controlling spirits just, are very, for the most case, I'm sure there's some weak spirits. And of course, that's some person on earth could control, but any higher spirit or spirit with a force, that's not going to be in the cards. And that's why you don't want to talk to lesser spirits. Plus, a lesser spirit won't know as much and they'll give you bad answers. So when you go to these, fortune tellers and you pay money, don't expect anything of real value. Right now, they might say, "Well, yeah, you lost your credit card down that little, hole over there in your living room." That's probably possible. But a high spirit, when they give you advice, again, they're not going to give you advice how to make money or who to marry, or they're going to give you higher spiritual advice. Now, a lower spirit may say someone likes you or someone doesn't because they can read people's minds. But the main thing is to say is that if you pay a medium for their service, then they're not going to have help from higher spirits, because mediums, and according to Spiritism and what I've seen in all the Spiritist meetings, mediums don't take money from anyone. It's all done. It's a gift from God, and they pass that gift on. So he said, "Well, what is it that you demand?" Because now the correct answer, I suppose, should have been your immortal soul, but I didn't care two penny cuss about a soul. So it was my turn to hesitate. Now, last I replied, "What do you have to offer me?" At once came the answer, "My soul." He goes, "Well, that's not use to me. In any case, it's damned already." "No, I want something which will benefit me personally," the officer said. "Well, what if I can give you a mortal body so you can walk this earth in the semblance of a man?" And the officer said, "Can you do this? For I have not an astral body," I inquired. "Nevertheless, I can manufacture one for you, and so enable you to obtain control of a physical one." And the officer said, and he spoke the truth, for by his knowledge of the occult, he was able to draw around him a host of empty astral shells and of the lighter elements. Seizing on one of the latter, I molded it into a semblance of my former self, and I found out I had an astral body. Then going over to the medium, with his assistance, built up a real material body. I gave a shout of delight. After all the nightmare of horror, I was back on earth again. But even as I did so, I felt it was but a temporary release. "Can I go outside?" I inquired. "I doubt it," he replied, "but still you can try." I climbed up the stone stairs and came out in the broad daylight. The effect was magical as well as unpleasant. I seemed to dissolve, or at least my physical covering did. I hurried down into the cellar, and we had to start to materializing again. "Well," I said, "a body which melts in the sun is not much good. You'll have to do something better than that." Then he said, "Well, you can always take control of someone with care. This materialized body will enable you to get about in the dark." In return for this, I agreed to help the magician in his plans. So a lot of these things he's saying, I don't know. I have not read about these things as far as human and spirit interactions, as far as taking over bodies. And I've read that about obsession, where people can certainly take over people and do that. But as far as how the magician exactly was operating, I'm not sure. I do know is that a spirit can materialize himself so people can see them, right? And I also know that people can create that they can create a sort of fluid that gives them a more of a denseness to their body. But as going out and walking around, that doesn't work. Now, Jesus Christ did that when he came after the resurrection into when he met his apostles. Now, but he is a very high pure spirit, and of course Jesus Christ is the leader of our planet, other planets besides. He's a very high spirit, not the highest spirit, but he's also one of the ones that helped create this whole solar system, create the Earth, shepherded the whole Earth from just a fiery ball, and went through all the different billions of years until we created humans, etc., and helped guiding now us here on Earth through this school, this campus, where we are here to improve our personality and character, to take out our primitive emotions and replace those with advanced emotions: love, charity, fraternity, and honesty. And of course, you have all these people on Earth, just like the officer, and then talking to this guy who calls himself the student of the occult, all doing things that are completely opposite of that. So why does God allow that? Because we have free will, and God in the spirit world allows us to do as dumb things as we want, because we have the free will not to advance. And that's why we're given life after life chances to improve. So then the officer goes, well, gold, power, and revenge were the chief things he desired. At the same time, he did not despise lesser advantages. He had about a dozen women over whom he had acquired absolute control, and were all mediumistic. These he used to help him materialize spirits and produce other phenomena. I helped him to acquire much gold. It was a simple process. I could pass through matter in my astral form, dematerialize some of the gold, carry it out into a place of safety, and there it would take up again the material elements, which for a time had been scattered. This process needed expenditure of considerable willpower, and an easier method was for me to take control of some denizens of the house in which the gold lay when asleep or in a trance. These would collect as much as they could carry and convey it to some place arranged by the musician and myself. Then they would return and would have no recollection of what happened next morning when they awoke. Now, let's talk about that when he said he dematerialized and then he took it to a different place. This is, again, and I forgot which book, in a book by Psychograph by Chico Xavier, in a series of Henri Louise. They're saying that, yes, it is possible for a spirit to dematerialize something. In fact, they talk one time, the spirit had this flower, this physical flower, and he dematerialized it, went through the other side of the wall, and rematerialized it. And in fact, Henri Louise told us that sometime in the future, we on Earth would have the scientific knowledge to do the same. So it's just like Star Trek, right? The teleportation, where you would dematerialize and then show up somewhere else. So this is within the realm of possibility, as according to the spirit realm. So then the officer talks more. He goes, once or twice they were followed and arrested, but though they were punished for theft, no suspicion fell on the student of the occult. Of course, when arrested, I cleared out and left the unfortunate spirit to re-enter his body and shoulder the responsibility. I was just as useful to my master in carrying out his schemes of revenge, for he had many enemies. He had a particular dislike of all forms of religion and vented it upon the clergy whenever he got an opportunity. At first, he contented himself with slight damage. Tricks were played on his victims by elementals. Things were thrown around the room. Crockery was smashed. When asleep, his victim was awakened by having his clothes pulled off the bed, his face smacked, and his nose tweaked, all possible by a real exertion by a spirit in the spirit world. But as time wore on, he found out he could do these things with impunity. His vicious character developed. Pinching and teasing gave place to physical violence. His victims were beaten black and blue or thrown downstairs, and attempts were made to set the houses on fire. As the phenomenon became more and more malevolent, the elementals for the most part dropped out, and even the spirits of the dead who had served him began to resist. They did not dare openly to defy him, for he had methods of making them suffer, but they did their work half-heartedly and badly. And so then the medium, J.W., said, well, how did he make the spirits suffer? And the officer said, by his will, he were, as it were, hypnotized them. This batch were weak-willed folk whom he compelled to do what he liked. He made them suffer if they resisted, just as we make each other suffer in hell. He found, however, that though I could not be threatened and bullied, yet I was far more willing than they were to inflict suffering upon men. So again, this tells us this is possible, is when you have a superior mental capacity, you can dominate someone, even human to human, right? We've seen that many times. But of course, in the spirit world, it's even more so. And in places like purgatory, where someone like the officer had a very heavy, and powerful focus and energy, although to the bad, not to the good, unfortunately, he could force the weaker willed spirits to do his bidding. In fact, you see many stories of this in books by J.S.M. And Chico Xavier, all told to him by spirits, where J.S.M. and Chico Xavier psychograph these communications from spirits, saying that yes, that one can impose their will. Now, if there's a high spirit coming and talking to the officer, no matter what his will, there'd be no contest. The high spirit would just say, no, you're not doing that. In fact, I think you'll find out later what happens to him. So the spirit world will allow people like the sorcerer and the officer to do their badness for a certain amount of time. But there will come an end to that. And the people that they allow them to do evil to are ones that probably needed that as one of their lessons. Because how does the spirit world turn evil into good? Well, they use evil to fight evil, and you'll see this. So he said, well, meanwhile, and then the officer kept saying, meanwhile, I had not neglected my own interest. Besides setting a few old scores and even partaking again when materializing or controlling of some of Earth's former pleasures, I had also been building up my influence over my master. Some of these scenes were in that old cellar under his house would have filled you with amazement. There would be at least a dozen of his girl mediums, some normal, others in trance. In addition, sometimes as many as a dozen materialized spirits. Except myself, these spirits came from the astral plane and were constantly changing as one after another hurled themselves out of their astral bodies through one or more of the occult sins. These materialized spirits would stand or sit and talk and even laugh and sing and dance. Nor were these innocent recreations all, but I will draw a veil. Sometimes, in the best vein of medievalism, the wizard would celebrate the Black Mass and we were the congregation. Meanwhile, however, I found it necessary to constantly renew my astral body. The mere fact that it was not really my own rendered it fragile and liable to disintegrate and further. The evil I was constantly doing hastened the dissolution. The result was that despite obsessing many people, I was constantly requiring new astral bodies. At length, my master called upon me to murder a man who had somehow got on the track of some of his deeds. I followed him to his house unseen, and between 1 and 2 in the morning set to work. Standing at the foot of his bed, I willed, and as I did so became visible in my astral body. The dull red glow which had always seemed to accompany me shed no illumination beyond making me visible. I willed still harder, and the wretched man saw all around him a host of evil shapes, bloated monsters, elements of every form and kind, while besides these were the malevolent faces of evil men and women. They shrieked, "Death to the traitor, tear him to pieces," and almost every moment they rushed at him, as if to carry out their threats. They were unable to do so, for it's very difficult for a non-physical being to hurt the body of a mortal unless he has done something to put it in their power. But this wretched victim did not know that, and he was in an agony of terror. And of course, this is true. If you just look at them and go, "Oh, well, that's a good costume," or "Boy," and you say, "No, you can't hurt me." Because it's all, remember, we are these logical constructs. And even in the physical world, to a certain extent, this power can affect us. Now, hopefully, if someone meditates and prays and is a good person, good spirits won't even allow them around them. That's not going to happen unless for some reason they thought, "Oh, this is a good experience for you." And then I cried aloud, "Have you forgotten Anna? We are here to avenge her. She is now in hell and has sent us to bring you there also." And an officer said, "As a matter of fact, she had not sent us, and we did not know whether she was in hell or not." And he screamed, "My God, after all these years, that sin must rise up and condemn me." So again, here's the answer. This is why he was allowed to be frightened and have these bad spirits after him, because he did do something wrong. And the spirit world said, "Okay, we're going to let this happen to you." So the officer writes, "We laughed derisively and went on in chorus. He calls, come away, come away." We rushed at him again and again. We cursed and jeered at him. And so all night long till morning broke, we tormented him. The next night it was the same. And again on the third night. All the while I kept urging him on. "Better death. Kill yourself. There's no hope. You're going mad. Better kill yourself before you go mad and kill someone else." And then he said, "Oh, Anna, can you not forgive me? I was but a young man and did not realize all it meant." Then one of the spirits assumed the shape of Anna and standing at the foot of the bed, cursed him until, driven desperate, he sprang out of the bed, seizing a razor, cut his throat. Now, so here's a set of spirits who actually caused a person to commit suicide. They drove him to it. And you can also read about that. The same thing happened in this wonderful book called The Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pierre. One of the best books. I would recommend everybody read that book. And then what the book was it was the life of Camilo Branco. Now, Camilo Branco was a well-known author in Portugal. It was called the Balzac of Portugal. I think he believed he committed suicide in 1899. He committed suicide because he was going blind. He was pretty old, but he was going blind because he had syphilis. But in the book, they were talking about, what happens to suicides and all these other people. And he went and he visited different wards of different people in different situations. And then he visited this one ward where they had this spirit pretty well locked up, which I'd never read before anywhere. They actually locked him up and said, "No, you can't leave. We have to, you've got to get better." And they told about the spirit is the fact that what he would do, he and his gang, they would go to men and women and hound them and get them to commit suicide. And he's just a despicable character. They talked a bit about his physical life where he just used his mother and father. He didn't care about them. They were starving. I don't care. He was just completely dishonorable to women, did anything he wanted to them. And then when he died, again, he would try to get people to commit suicide. So when they commit suicide, then they would take the spirit and use them as their slave. And they were trying to tell him, "No, look, you need to understand what you did wrong." And they'd kept him in that kind of prison for they said 38 years, if I remember correctly. But it's just so, so I say, everyone has free will. They can do what they want, but there's exceptions to everything. This is how complicated and how nuanced the spirit world is. There's so much there. And in fact, everything I'm telling you is probably just information given to us by different, spiritist authors, Chico Xavier, Divaldo Franco, Yvonne Pierre, Allan Kardec was not a medium, but he put a lot of things together through different mediums. And another good book you should read of his is Heaven and Hell. And it just tells you more and more about the spirit world. So all this is fascinating. These weird things you hear from people, I just don't understand that. A lot of them has a lot of truth. And this is why I've written my books, to show you what the spirit world is. So you understand why you're on earth, right? You're on earth to improve yourself. But there's a lot here that sounds as I'm talking about this thing, sounds pretty bad. But you have to remember, these are all there to help each one of these persons improve themselves. Now, here's the spirit world. Let this guy kill himself. Now that was horrible, but he must have done something bad. So now the officer wrote, "My master was delighted by the successes of these operations, and I urged him on to attempt something similar against a young priest whom he hated. The man had denounced him as being in league with the devil, which was largely true, and therefore angered my master the more. We plagued him, but though we caused him much annoyance by disturbing his sleep and so forth, we failed to hurt him much. Then I inspired one of the prettiest village maids to fall desperately in love with him. She followed him for weeks and finally threw herself on her knees in the church, while pretending to confess and beg for his love. Thus refused, I turned her love to anger, and she spread all sorts of ugly rumors concerning him. Then we attacked him again more fiercely. We scoffed at his religion and told him it was false, or else the good God would not allow us to come to him. We told him he was about to be disgraced, and we urged him to escape the consequences of his evil life by suicide. And he says the poor devil had a remarkably innocent life, and as a matter of fact, and was not quite such a fool as not to know it. We persecuted him like this for weeks until at one night he cried, "I believe you are sent by that wretched old man whom I denounce as in league with the devil. I'll go and tell him what I think of him now." And at once we urged him to do so. For once there, it would be strange if our master could not finish him off. Seizing a crucifix, he stepped out into the darkness, and we followed him, jeering and threatening him. So this is a good priest, an innocent person who really is full of love and niceness. And they couldn't really do much. They could like bother him a little bit. And he said, "Okay, I know what's going on." So carry on. It was a wild night, a fit setting to the tragedy. The wind howled and rain beat in his face. Overhead, the lightning flashed and the thunder roared. I shrieked in his ear, "Hearken to the voice of God denouncing you, you hypocrite. Look at his lightning threatening to blast you. See how the whole face of heaven is black against you. Accursed of God and man, soon will you come to us in hell." So there's these bad spirits following that student of the occult, trying to destroy this guy's enemy. So now let's see what happens. At length he reached the door of my master's house and knocked. It was open, and he found himself in a dark passage. No one spoke, and he stumbled forward, seeking a door. The first one he reached was locked, and so was the second, for some of us had gone forward to warn the magician. But a door at the end was not fastened. He opened this, and entering, found the magician waiting for him in a dimly lighted study. The priest denounced him fiercely, but the magician answered not a word, but gazed fixedly at him till his denunciation died slowly away, and he stood there silent, a disheveled figure with a haunted look upon his face. At length my master spoke. "You fool, what made you come here? Your doom is sealed." He began to chant an invocation, and as he did, we gathered round and recommenced our work of persecuting the poor wretch. Again the master spoke. "Tomorrow you will be announced before the whole of your congregation. I have 2 women here who will bear witness that you seduced them, and you were in the habit of visiting them here. I caught you tonight, and it is because I have suspected you for some time and done my best to frustrate your evil designs that you have denounced me as in league with the evil one." Then the priest said, "It is false, and you know it. I will deny it and tell the whole world of the evil spirits who obey your commands." And the student of the occult said, "And who will believe you? If they don't consider the story a lie, they'll declare it due to drink or madness. No, my fine fellow, you're done for. It will be a nasty blow for religion, too." And while he was speaking, he threw a heavy weight at the priest, which felled him to the ground. "Don't kill him yet," I urged. "Wait till he has been thoroughly discredited." "Not I," he replied. "I only intend to obtain some evidence of his guilt. A few trinkets which the 2 women can produce as evidence. A lock or 2 of his hair, to begin with, this handkerchief and this seal from his watch chain." And then the officer said, "Well, can we get him to commit some sin?" And then my master jumped at the idea. But almost the same moment, we were overwhelmed with a flood of light. It seemed to burn and scorch me, and its whiteness was so intense that no words of mine can describe it. This light came from a gigantic spirit of commanding and awful presence, his guardian angel. So again, here's this priest. He is being protected by his guardian angel. Let's go over this and I'll tell you some other examples. He spoke, and his words rang out like a trumpet. "No man may be tempted beyond that which is able to resist. Yet you have been permitted to tempt and persecute this man, that he may come forth from the temptation strengthened by it." Let me stop there. See, these things happen for a reason. They're letting this wonderful priest be tempted and be attacked, right? But this is an experience he needed to go through. So then the guardian angel said, "But your work is finished. The cup of your iniquities is filled to the brim. Go down to the depth of hell, and go thither also, thou spirit from hell. Return to a place even lower than that from which thou camest." And as he spoke, this is the officer saying, the fire seemed to burn me through and through, and the magician fell dead. His spirit rapidly separated from its body, and then the astral body, exposed to that terrible light, shivered and shattered and fell away. The naked spirit fell with an agonized shriek and vanished from my sight. At the same instant, I felt myself whirling through space down into utter darkness. But when I realized I was in hell, I was not back in my old kingdom or in the city of hate. I had sunk lower still, and had almost reached the bottom division of hell. But of what befell me there, I will tell you at another time. So let's go over some other examples. There is this great book by Reverend G.V.A. Owen called Paul and Albert. And in this doctor called Paul, he had died and he went to the lower zone. Now, he was a doctor, but he liked money more than patience. And Albert was, of course, was the husband of a woman that he wanted to seduce. And when Albert had broken his nose, the doctor deliberately said it incorrectly to make him look ugly. This is the type of person this doctor was. And so the doctor was put into the lower zone, and he was wandering the lower zone. And then he met one of his old girlfriends that he treated terrible, and he got mad at her, and he picked up a stick, and he was going to hit her with the stick. But as he went and he raised his arm like this, right? And he said, he's raised his arm, he's going to hit her with a stick. He just felt like he couldn't move. And the woman's guardian angel said, no, and there was this, and he could not move. Yet he couldn't believe that this woman could, just completely control him like that. But of course, she was a higher spirit, and he was nothing compared to her. And he said, no, you're not doing that. She's tried to help you, and you're being this way. He goes, you can keep wandering around hell, and you can learn what you need to learn. And when you're ready, we can talk. So again, this is how the spirit world works, right? They'll let you go to the certain level, and they go, that's enough, or you're not going to let you hurt this person more than that person, needed as an experience or some sort of atonement, right? Because this is why on Earth we are called a planet of atonement, because we are here to pay for our past wrongs. So everyone that they had done, that these spirits had tried to hurt in some way, that was all determined to happen to them for what they'd done in the past. And that was going to help them in the future become a better person, because that's how we are when we're on Earth, is we are put through these emotionally draining traumas, because that's the only way to get us to really rip out our primitive emotions and make changes in our heart, right? And because we want to be a better person. So then JW said, before you go, can you explain why you appeared red when you came back to Earth? And then the spirit that's been helping him talk to this officer said, I think it was not only because the sorcerer expected to see him like that, but also because his aura was full of the red rays, which represent anger and hate. Okay, so I have a good question. There we go. Show this again. We are here to pay past wrongs. Oh my God. Yes, that is. So let's talk about that, because I think this is a very important thing to explore. And this is what Spiritism tells us. And let's go through this whole, because this is important. So, of course, a lot of religions, Hindu and so forth, will tell you about reincarnation, all this. And this is what Spiritism also tells us. And of course, what's great about Spiritism is that it tells us things in specifics. We know a lot more about the spirit world, why we're here, etc. So let me explain this. In your previous life, everything is recorded, every detail. Now, what does that mean? Now, it means everything, every thought. And now, how do we know this? Well, we're told by different sources. One is by spiritist sources that said every thought, everything is sent, and you have a unique ID, and it's recorded. And we also know this when you look at experiences from near-death experiences, right? Where people go up and they have this life review, and they will say, "Oh, they played this scene from my life, and I was there, and it was like even my emotions, and then the person was talking to me, and I even felt what that other person. I knew what that other person was thinking." So, of course, everything is recorded. So, if you think about privacy, it's not there. We're like kindergartners who don't know the teacher's watching everything we do. It all goes into this universal database. So then in your current life, results from your previous life, and maybe lives before that, So your current life is made from a curriculum is made from what you had done right and wrong. This is good and bad are all taken into account, not just bad, and mistakes and so forth. Is then there's a customized curriculum is created for you in your current life, and that could be things that you have to pay for. It also could things that you just need more experience, right? It's like you just might want more experience. They might want to say, oh, he needs experience. This, right? Um, Maybe leadership in a company or something else. But as you're living this life, everything's being recorded. So then, and it's when people say, well, how can I have a better life than the next life? I said, well, do good in this life, because your future life, your present life now is recorded and will be used to determine your next life. And so whatever you have done right and wrong will all be taken account. It's really all about it's about replacing our primitive emotions. This is selfishness, jealousy, hate, thirst for revenge, pride, and putting in selflessness, charity, honesty, fraternity, all those things. This is what it's about. And so also, once you know this process, it should allow you to forgive people easier, because God, you don't have to get revenge. If someone did something terrible to you, you don't have to get revenge for that. It will all happen. They will learn that what they did to you was wrong, and they will then go through some sort of process that they'll some sort of episode or drama will happen to them. So what they did to someone else will be done in some sort of manner to them. So if you've had, let's say, an incident, let's say you had a horrible marriage and your significant other was just horrible to you and stole your money, did all that stuff. Well, I have news for you. Most probably you did that in a previous life. Now, everyone would say, why did that happen to poor old who knows what, right? And they go, they never did anything wrong to anybody. And yes, you did not do anything wrong to anybody in this life, but in a previous life, you did. And this should help you understand why the earth appears so chaotic. We're a planet of atonement. And that's why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, because we don't know the whole history. And a lot of the times people will come to this earth and before they come, they will be part and process of this curriculum for them to learn. And they will ask for these things to happen to them. There is this one example, great example in one of Chico Xavier's books. This woman came and just was a complete invalid. She was bedridden her whole life. And why did that happen? Well, she asked for that. Why did she ask for that? In one of her previous lives, she was a queen of Spain. And though she did not torture people directly, she signed a lot of the orders to torture people by the Spanish Inquisition. And therefore, she knew she had to pay for that horrible deeds. That's why when people think, well, I was this queen, or I was this, this powerful person. And I always think to myself, you don't really want to be that, because that means you got a lot more to pay for, because most probably you weren't a nice person if you were that powerful. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that. But yes, you really, if you are wealthy or powerful now, you want it. I'm not saying to give away everything. I'm just saying treat everyone honestly, and just follow the golden rule. Treat others as you would want to be treated. And, if you carry on with that, no one's expect you to wear a hair shirt or any of that. So let me get back to what we're talking about, why he was red. And so the other spirit, who was a higher level, right? He arranged this interview for the JW to talk to the officer. He goes, because the aura was full of red rays, which represent anger and hate. As you know, our auras change color with the passion that dominates us at the time. And then JW goes, your story, officer, grows more and more extraordinary as it proceeds. I doubt whether that part of the magician will be believed, though. I know you're telling the truth. You see, magic has fallen in such disrepute, hardly anybody believes in it now. And the officer said, I don't care whether they believe it or not. It is true, and only by relating it can I explain what next befell me. I should not have sunk lower if it had not been for that adventure. And that was it. So we'll go more what happens to him next week when he falls even lower into hell. And of course, what's happening? Why is he falling lower? Why didn't he go back to the city of hate, as he calls it? Well, because of the law of affinity. The law of affinity is like associates with like. So if you're a decent person and you'll go to heaven and you'll be at the level of heaven of which other people are like you, kind of the same, ideas and likes and the same niceness and supporting each other. If you're like a pickpocket or some sort of petty criminal, you'll be amongst them. You may be in one of those, lower level cities where you're just getting by, you're trying to take advantage of other people. Of course, as you're doing that, other people are taking advantage of you, and you're finding out, like, just being selfish and mean to everyone, now that everyone is selfish and mean to me, I don't think I like it. And of course, again, as I said before, that is how the spirit world fights evil. They use evil to fight evil. And that's why bad things happen to us here on this life too. So I hope this gives people an understanding of how complex this process is. Now, I've been talking to people, and people ask me, like, what happens to this? What happens, that person if he's done that? And I think the general summary of what I like to say is everything is taken into account, all good and bad intentions, and that there's no one rule for anybody. And, like, there's a general thing of what we're told in Spiritist literature is for suicides, is if you commit suicide, and let's say you committed suicide at 50, and yet you were supposed to live till you're 58, then you have to spend the last 8 years in the lower zone. Even if you're, a good person, but then you decided to commit suicide, that you cannot leave your class early, and therefore you'll be in the lower zone for 8 years. And this is kind of what happened to Andre Louis. He, the one who wrote all these great books with Chico, he stayed in the lower zone because he was an unconscious suicide. So what is an unconscious suicide? Well, he drank himself to death, and he also had syphilis. And of course, that killed him. So, but there are exceptions. There are a relation in a book where a woman committed suicide, but what happened is her husband was so cruel that he took her baby and threw it in the river to die. And he was cruel to her, and she just finally committed suicide. Well, the spirit world absolutely said, oh, she was not going to be punished at all. And then, of course, you'll have young women like you're talking about, what this officer said, where they tried to make people commit suicide, where they were hounded by spirits. And if that happens, again, they're not going to blame that person because they were driven mad by that. So there's all these things around. I think the main thing to get is the spirit world is so knowing, because they have all your data, they know everything, and they're also so loving. And therefore, I don't want people to think that you're going to be, that they're doing these things and giving you these experiences to punish you. It's always about edification. But then people tell me, well, that's a hard lesson. Well, again, what you've read, and when I've read things of people's subsequent lives, is it's a hard lesson because you didn't learn the easy lesson, right? And of course, I'm sure that happened to me too. The harder you resist the lesson, then it's the more dramatic it's going to be. And so I think that is something to think about. Is so when these episodes happen to you, and you find yourself like, oh, and then you find yourself mad or whatever, think about what you can learn from that, and think about you never want to do what was done to you, and learn from that. And then think about, oh, did I do that to someone in a previous life? I am so sorry, and I'll never do that again. So what that will do is that will build up into you that new personality. Now, of course, I know people say, well, how can I know my lesson? I don't know my previous life, right? But believe me, these lessons are so complicated and created for you that you will learn what you need to learn. You don't need to know exactly what you did wrong. You will know. You in your heart, you'll say, oh, and if you learn correctly. If you refuse to learn from your experience, that's another story. Then you'll have a harder and harder lesson in your future lives. Now, the good thing about it is when you learn these lessons, You don't go and you're a spirit and you come back to earth and then you're, have another child and everything, and you're just as mean as you were before. No, because now when you're a child, you're malleable, but the spirit world tells us that when you're about 15 to 20, your true personality starts coming out. Your true spirit personality, and with you comes your conscience, which you should always listen to, right? In fact, someone wrote me today and he said, what I tell my families, don't rationalize away with your conscience. And I thought that was a good quote, is don't use your conscience to don't try to, if you feel guilty about something, don't try and tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't feel guilty. No, it's telling you, your conscience is given to you as the result of all these lives, and you're building up this like law library of what is right and what is wrong. That's why when primitive people, when they do things wrong, the spirit world doesn't, is not, they're not going to try to teach them really, really hard lessons because they don't know any better. They're just going to go through, tribe after tribe and learn things slowly. But for us who are more sophisticated, we should know better. And therefore, sometimes our trials are hard. And then also your instinct. Your instinct comes with you as you're building up from life after life. So those are two very important things that you have with you in your physical life. So I want to thank everyone. Please subscribe, hit the like button, tell other people. And of course, I come every Sunday and Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and you can reach me. And so I think in September I will take a little break from the live streams. I'll still post, other of my videos, but I will take a little break from live streaming. But I want to thank everyone, and God bless.